Welcome to the Science Fiction Prototyping Podcast. I am Brian David Johnson, and the Science Fiction Prototyping column is in the IEEE Computer Magazine. And every couple of months we talk about the use of science fiction prototyping in industry and also being used out in the world. And let me just say, it has been a very, very busy last couple of months for myself and some of the folks around science fiction prototyping. We are just back from the launch of the 21st Century Robot project at the World Maker Faire in New York. And as a part of that, I took Jimmy, one of the 21st Century robots. I took an exoskeleton of Jimmy. He was about 2 feet tall. He was 3D printed on a MakerBot replicator. And we took Jimmy all around New York City. He was the exoskeleton of the 21st Century Robot. We were kicking off the project to get people together to start dreaming up and building and designing these robots. And I wrote about it in this month's column, Jimmy Takes Manhattan, because it was rather remarkable how popular Jimmy turned out to be. That everybody from curmudgeonly news anchors to really cool new media CEOs, everybody understood Jimmy. Everybody understood the idea of a 21st century robot. And all of those ideas were born in science fiction prototyping. The 21st Century Robot Manifesto starts with the lines, "A robot is imagined first." The idea behind it is that anybody can build a robot, because anybody can imagine a robot. Anybody could imagine what their own personal robot might look like, what it might do, and that a 21st century robot is a hyper-personalized robot that anybody can build. And that's why we wanted to start off the manifesto with this notion that a robot is imagined first. And that comes specifically from science fiction prototyping. So have a look at the column this week, this month. It was really, really fun to write. It was really chronicling the really kind of crazy madcap couple of days that we had going around Manhattan, introducing everybody to Jimmy and the 21st Century Robot project and talking to everybody about the project and trying to get them involved. Now, this month on the podcast, I'm really, really honored that I was able to get some time with Dr. Simon Egerton. Now, Simon is a roboticist. He is a teacher and an academic at Manash University in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And Simon was really the first person that I sat down with and started talking about these robots, these 21st century robots. It was really working with people like Simon and also people like Vic Callahan and some of the other folks at the Creative Science Foundation, really thinking about what would a 21st century robot really be like. And so I thought it would only be fitting to sit down with the good doctor after his little robot and our little science fiction prototypes that started so small had gotten quite big. I thought it only fitting that he and I sit down and kind of talk about his impressions of the project and also his hopes for what we might be able to accomplish with science fiction prototyping in the future. So let's have a listen to that, and I'll be back. So Dr. Simon Egerton, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the Science Fiction Prototyping Podcast. It is a great honor to have you here with us today.
Thank you very much.
So it should be said that you and I are on a phone call. I am in Portland, Oregon, while you are in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, where you work at Manash University. What's the weather like in KL today?
Well, right now it's early in the morning and it's hot and humid, which is typical.
Now, Simon, I wanted to ask you. So I think we need to clear the water here to say that the stories, the science fiction prototyping stories that have become the Jimmy the Robot stories and the 21st Century Robot stories, they feature a character that has a very similar name to you, Dr. Simon Egerton, but it should be said that your name is actually Dr. Simon Egerton. very subtle, but it is good to keep the lines between reality and fiction drawn. And the story that we have in this month's Science Fiction Prototyping magazine, in the column in the IEEE magazine, is called Jimmy Takes Manhattan. And Jimmy Takes Manhattan is about some real great successes we've had with the 21st Century Robot Project that you and I and Vic Callahan and a few other people at the Creative Science Foundation started a while back. And I wanted to find out, what is your impression? I mean, this began so long ago, for you and I having a conversation and some of the other, roboticists and engineers, and it's really taken off. And really, with this trip to New York and the media trip that Jimmy and I went through, it really shows that we've hit a nerve. We've hit something that's really gotten people interested in this. It's really captured their imagination, and it's really taken you and your work and literally taken your name all over the globe. What's that been like? What do you think about this whole process?
Well, when I think back to all those years ago, I wouldn't have imagined that it would have led here, but I'm so glad it has. Modern research is all about, I think, conducting interdisciplinary research and making that accessible to the public. And I think what we have here is the epitome of multidisciplinary research and public awareness for the work. Not only does the science fiction prototyping process give public access to the research ideas that are happening in our research laboratories, it also gives a mechanism for people to work with the ideas and take those ideas and develop those ideas themselves. So I'm really pleased with how this has worked out, and how the idea of having Jimmy the robot capture people's imaginations, especially the younger generation, as it brings them into the ideas of robotics and AI and future technology. So I think it's been a fantastic tool.
Well, that's wonderful. Yeah, and I need to also just personally thank you for allowing me and giving me permission to drag your name all over the world and take it to those kids. I appreciate that.
It's kind of surreal reading your namesake in a story, and seeing your namesake doing all these fantastic things in the future. Wonderful.
Well, I think it might give you things to sort of hope for and look out for, that you're going to have a very, very bright and complicated and very interesting future, certainly. One of the things, Simon, I wanted to talk a little bit more about, which we haven't been able to do in the prototypes because it's a little bit more in depth, but I think for the IEEE audience and the audience for this column, it would be good, is really the foundational technology that sits inside of Jimmy and the really concept of the 21st century robot, which is the idea of the quantum persona transfer and that building block. So what have you been working on with that, and how are things going with that?
Well, yeah, the original idea for this was the idea of what type of AI would a future robot have, and what type of AI do we have sitting inside ourselves to help us make decisions. And the normal model is a deterministic, stochastic, probabilistic model for decision making. But I sat down after reading Roger Penrose's book, The Emperor's New Mind, and I thought, well, maybe we work in a slightly different way. And maybe we don't have a deterministic model inside our heads, and our decisions are arrived at through some non-deterministic process. And if that's true, what would that look like? And if you think about it long enough, then you eventually arrive at this idea of absolute randomness, which is embodied in the idea of quantum mechanics and quantum theory. So I began to think, well, what would that look like inside a robot AI, and how would you get it to work? And so we developed the high-level framework and model for these non-deterministic AI controllers, which essentially revolves around a quantum transfer function which enables the decision-making process with these robots that have multiple personas, multiple personalities. And that's where we are right now. And we're in the process of developing and building and testing the model, really with an open question. The are these non-deterministic models really feasible? Do they work? Are they any better than the deterministic stochastic models that we already have? And I think this is where science fiction prototypes have really helped. How do we take these ideas and concepts to a wider audience? How do we engage the wider audience in helping us answer these questions? So instead of having a traditional model where you have a research team inside a research lab working on a problem, we now have, with these science fiction prototypes in Jimmy, a tool bed to have an open sourced answer, a community answer to the question.
So let me ask you this, Simon. As we've been going through and doing work with the science fiction prototypes, as a process, not only for the development of AI and the development of robots, but what do you think, as a teacher, as, a scientist and engineer, what is your hope for the future of science fiction prototypes?
Well, I'd like to see more research groups get involved with this idea of science fiction prototyping, and I think as an academic and as a teacher, it's really an accessible way to expose, particularly undergraduate students and even school, pre-university students, expose those students to the ideas of research and where research today could lead them in the future. So I think it's a great tool for crowdsourcing research questions and getting a much wider community response back into those research questions. And I'm sure this whole process will lead to some very surprising answers, which I'm also hoping will happen, and I'm sure will happen with the Jimmy prototypes.
Yes, I think I'm very, very excited to see what comes of the project. I mean, certainly, as we've been going down this journey now for several years, it's always filled with sort of wonderful surprises and things we'd never really thought of before, and I think that's what makes it exciting and also the beauty of science fiction prototyping. Dr. Simon Egerton, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the Science Fiction Prototyping Podcast today, and I also want to thank you again for collaborating with me, and I do think that your future is going to be filled with some very interesting adventures, but thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
I have to say, it is always a great joy of mine to talk to Simon. He has a way of phrasing concepts and a way of talking about complex artificial intelligence architectures and a way of just putting things that really captures, I think, the imagination as he starts talking about something which could be, as obtuse and complicated as a quantum persona transfer, that it starts to make actually really good sense. And that's why actually collaborating with him over these last few years has been really quite fruitful and a joy, that he's got a way of putting things that really, I think, captures the imagination, especially when he's talking about robots and the possibilities of robots. And also, I am always floored at just how good he has been about us taking his name all over the world. That the Dr. Simon Egerton stories have truly gone around the world many, many times, and he's always been such a wonderful sport about the homage, the original homage when I was writing the stories, to have it be about him. But now so many people have heard about him and heard about his work that it does make me quite happy. So thank you for joining us on the Science Fiction Prototyping Podcast. I have to say as well that we've been getting some really, really good science fiction prototype ideas. We've also been getting some really great Copernican moments. If you remember back to a previous column, we talked about people's Copernican moments, that moment when everything changes just because of one flash of insight, and how science fiction prototyping could be a really great platform to explore that flash of insight. We've been getting some really amazing ideas from people all over. And also been getting some really interesting science fiction prototypes, some ideas as well as some actual fictions that we will be bringing to the column in the next few months and certainly into 2014. So please keep them coming. As always, if you have any ideas around science fiction prototyping or some possible science fiction prototyping topics, please email them to me at brian.david.johnson@intel.com, or you can always follow me and get me on Twitter. I'm at IntelFuturist. Also, if you have a chance and you want to know more information about the 21st Century Robot Project, you can go to www.robots21.com. That's ROBTS 21.com, robots21.com. You can download an early version of the book, 21st Century Robot, that has 4 science fiction prototypes in it, and then every other chapter is the beginnings of the how-to to actually go out and build these robots. And we're going to continue to open source and collaborate on this book until May of 2014, when we will pull it all together and launch the book. So go have a look at that. If you have any questions or any comments about that, you can certainly get in touch with me here as well. So again, I want to thank you for joining me on the Science Fiction Prototyping Podcast, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.